Hello again, everyone. This is Pastor Chris Hewett with you. This is the Hewett Family Podcast, episode 31. And in today's podcast, I've got my dear friend, former pastor, I said it for 20 years, brother Evangelist Chris Simpson with us today. And y'all have, he's been a blessing on the show, and I think you'll enjoy it today. We got a unique topic we're going to be talking about. Go ahead and like, subscribe, and share this, and we'll be back with the episode. All right, everyone. Thank you again for being with us today. And I received a couple weeks ago. I received a request for a topic, and I've made a post on Facebook asking if some topics that people would like to hear about. And my friend, Brother Danny, he pastors, good brother. He asked, when should a pastor think about resigning or stepping down? Asking about discernment, how to know when you stay too long. When to know to make a ministry switch. Brother Chris used the word transitioning and in ministry. So we're going to talk about that today. And I've in my past, and I'm going to let Brother Chris tell a little bit about his background and why I brought him in on this. But in my past, obviously God called me to preach. God allowed me to be a youth pastor here for 3 years at Ridge Road Baptist Church back in the early 2000s, and then spent 13 years in missions evangelism, and then went from missions evangelism into pastoring. And so I didn't just want it to be me talking, but I have made some transitions in ministry. And thanks be to God, me and Brother Chris have been friends our whole life. And literally every transition, we kind of went through these together. So, Brother Chris, tell a little bit about your backstory, about where you've, and welcome to the podcast, but tell about a little bit where your backstory, and then we'll get into the discussion.
Yeah, sure. So, I started pastoring in 2008 at age 20, and I was at the White Oak Springs Baptist Church in Dallas, Georgia for 5 years, and then I felt like the Lord was dealing with my heart about resigning, and I guess we'll get into that here in just a minute a little bit more. But and then I went to Walters Grove Baptist Church in Lexington, North Carolina, and I was there for not quite but almost 11 years, and then felt a call into evangelism. So there's been some transitions, there's been some kind of discerning, hey, what is God doing? What am I supposed to do? And there definitely has been those transitions in my life. So
yes, sir. And
for sure,
I remember specifically, and I want to tell this, and we're going to get into some. Brother Chris is going to bring the wisdom. I'm going to bring the stories. I remember, back at White Oak, which it seems so crazy to me, like that was yesterday, and you spent most of your life there.
Yeah,
right?
Sure.
It's so crazy. But Brother Chris I was preaching a meeting at White Oak in the January of, what would that year have been, 12?
That would have been 2013.
Yes.
It would have been January of 2013.
Yes.
Yeah.
That is when Brother Samuel and I really met.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember that. Brother Samuel came by the meeting.
Yeah.
But I was preaching the meeting there with Brother Darrell Hayes.
Brother Hayes, yeah.
And Brother Chris had spent 3 days away with a jug of water and his Bible, along with the Lord, and come back, and it's like, man, I'm resigning. And let me give y'all a hint or a tip. Don't ever tell your visiting evangelist you're resigning at the beginning of the meeting. That's from an evangelistic standpoint. Yeah. But we were very young. But I'm not holding that against Brother Chris right now.
Yeah, sorry.
And then Brother Chris and I, literally in November 22, he begins to talk to me about going into evangelism. And then December of 22, God begins to deal with my heart about pastoring. Yeah. And it was just crazy. Like, God has allowed us to kind of be there. He has been there for me so much. When I was praying about going to Bible college, I don't know if you remember that the parsonage.
Yeah, I do.
Going to Bible college, and these are all transitions. So don't think just because you're a pastor or not a pastor that this episode's not going to be for you, because we're talking about discerning the will of God. So, Brother Chris and I remember that day sitting there for over an hour in the Suburban, just talking in the parking lot at Walters Grove, and then obviously a month later, I'm calling Brother Chris. And listen. I want to say this on the outset. You will not know the specific will of God for your life unless you're doing the general will of God for your life. Don't think that we've got this magic answer that's going to bypass the basics of the Christian life. Because if you're not reading your Bible, if you're not praying, if you're not walking with God, if you're not seeking the Lord, witnessing, doing these things, living the Spirit-filled life, it's going to be really hard for you to discern anything. Mm-hmm. And it's a very dangerous thing. If you're not doing the general will of God, don't expect the specific will of God. And I'm sure some of these principles we talk about today will even transfer into relationships, when to go to Bible college, all of those things. If God's calling you to preach, maybe. So, Brother Chris, kick us off. What are some thoughts you have about this topic?
Yeah, I was thinking about, when you asked me about saying a few words concerning these things, about when to make a ministry change. Now, I'll just kind of jot down a few things. I think there could possibly be some exception to what I'm going to say, but I think as a rule, what I would say is, what started coming to mind was more of when not to make a ministry change. Kind of take it from the negative and the opposite. So I would just kind of put them like this. I would say don't make a ministry change, especially I'm thinking about pastors resigning and stuff like that, but this could apply to anybody, anywhere. But don't make a ministry change when you're super discouraged. That would probably be a bad time to make. So
let me say this: that means you never get to make a ministry change if you're pastoring a Baptist. No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding, but that was a little tongue in cheek. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, I would say when you're super discouraged. I think.
Thank you for qualifying that.
Yeah.
Could you put that on a meter for us?
Right. Yeah. It's when you're super discouraged, not when you're discouraged. But no, I'm serious. I think that. Obviously there are going to be seasons of discouragement and depression and things. And I'm not talking about medical or clinical. I'm just talking about when you're cast down. Things aren't happening the way that you thought they would. Results aren't coming in. If you quit or think that you're done somewhere every time that happens, well, you're never going to see any fruit anywhere or anything like that. So there are seasons of discouragement. That don't mean you leave. I always think about Elijah when he was by the brook. He didn't leave the brook Cherith when the brook dried up. He left when the word of the Lord came to him and told him to leave. It said the brook dried up, but then it said the next verse, and the word of the Lord came to him and told him to get to Zarephath. But it wasn't the brook. You don't go by the brook, you go by the book, is what I say.
Yeah. Hallelujah.
Circumstances is not the Lord of your life.
Yes.
Circumstances are not the Lord of your life. You have to discern the will of God. But I would say watch out for seasons of discouragement, because the thing is, you're not always going to be discouraged like you might be right now, or in certain seasons you have been. Because that's one thing you got to know about ministries. And if you don't stay anywhere long enough, you don't necessarily learn this. And that is that there are seasons. It's cyclical. It's seasonal. There's good times, bad times, up times, down times. And they're not always going to be this way. They're not always going to be this good. They're not always going to be this bad. And you have to kind of discern, okay, this is just the season. So I would just make sure that you're not doing anything out of discouragement. Okay, I'm discouraged and I feel like I got to do something. So that was one of the first things.
I want to say something about that, because I've noticed about your life in particular, and then in my life as well, we kind of got to leave places at a really good spot. Like, I was not discouraged in the youth pastor position. The youth were doing great.
Sure.
I was not I loved evangelism, and I know you love pastoring. And it was almost like a funeral when you did leave.
Yeah.
And it's not going to. I don't think it's going to be like that for everybody, because some places just aren't going to go forward.
Yeah.
But I thank God that we kind of got to leave on a good place. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And that would kind of be a disclaimer I would say too, is that the kind of the things that I'm thinking of and principles and things, it kind of works, if you're leaving on a good note. And sometimes pastors and different, you don't leave on a good note, and it's not your fault. Sometimes it's not always your fault. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it's not. I mean, if if there's rebellion and people don't want to go with God, and you're kind of getting booted out, there's nothing you can do about that.
That's
You
right.
know what I'm saying? It's obviously, and there's an old preacher that's from this area, the Paulding County area, that's pastored every church in Paulding County that had, I think he's in heaven now, and I'm not going to say his name, but I rember him talking to my dad one time in the Martin's restaurant, getting a biscuit.
It's getting real now.
Yeah, he said, Rick, he said, there's one good thing about being asked to leave a church. And Dad said, what's that? He said, well, you don't have to pray about leaving. You don't have to pray about resigning. And so I would say, if you're getting booted out or voted out or something, this is obviously, not applicable in every way. I'm thinking about more the person that is, has a work for God, but God is starting. You feel like maybe God's dealing with your heart about stepping down or stepping out. Maybe a pastor's going to be a missionary or a pastor or evangelist or whatever the case may be, or you're on staff at a church and you feel like God's calling you to to be a pastor at another church, something like that, where there's not necessarily pressure to leave and get out. You're literally trying to discern, and that's and there was a part of me when I resigned, especially Walters Grove, I felt like things were going fairly well, and of course we loved them, they loved us, we loved being there, that's for sure, and I almost felt, there was a part of me that felt like I wish they would just vote me out. It would be easier. It would be easier, I think, maybe. And that's probably foolish, but I just thought, just trying to figure out, trying to leave a good place, leave a place where that you love. That's tough, and I'm not looking for any sympathy. I'm just saying
it's tough.
I'm just saying it was tough. I wasn't like super discouraged. I think there's always like a baseline, measure of discouragement, in the pastorate, except for some guys they're on the mountain every day, all the time, But I think for most pastors, there's just kind of, because people business is messy.
People are people.
And they're people, and you're a people too, and you disappoint yourself, and people disappoint you, and there's just discouragement, kind of a baseline measure. That's just a given. There's going to be some of that. So I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about just in a very, very low place. Mm-hmm. Don't leave in a low place, because here's the thing: when you get out of that low place, you might look back and realize you gave something up that you may not be able to get back. And so I would just, make sure and give it some time. And I may say something a little more about time in a little bit, but I would say, that would matter. Don't do it when you're discouraged. So when not to make a ministry change, when you're super discouraged, and this is a simple one. Maybe when you're bored, when you just kind of, the monotonous, the routine, the everyday, and pastor ministry has a lot of that. There are exciting times and there are low times, but most days are just, you open your Bible, you study, you visit, it's just another Sunday morning, another Sunday night, another Wednesday night, another visitation, another revival, another missions conference, or whatever. There is a monotony to ministry. And so if you just feel like life's getting monotonous or boring, I don't think that's grounds. I think there's some other things that might be wrong and other things that might need to be, I think we need to kind of start looking at our zeal for the Lord, or maybe we need to stay in that ministry, but we need to kind of up what we're doing there, not necessarily go somewhere else thinking the grass might be greener on the other side, but maybe, kind of turn up the volume on what we're doing there, and maybe not, but I'm just saying, I don't think that's a good, that's not grounds for,
can I say something on that?
Yeah, sure.
I've always heard this, and I'm guessing this is true, but I've heard it said that you don't really become a church's pastor until like 5 years in. Like you build that family, that unit, that group together, which is kind of scary because I'm not even 2 years in yet, which is crazy. But I think a lot of guys it gets monotonous, like you're talking about. And they get discouraged, like, they won't do anything. Maybe, like you just said, internally, if we'll turn it up a little bit, they'll turn it up, because it takes that 5 years for them to really even start following you in a good way. And I'm not saying that across the board. God can do what he wants to, but we're saying statistically that's what it looks like in most pastorates. I think a lot of guys leave to go find it where they can turn it up somewhere else, where they've already earned the respect in one place.
You got to go somewhere else and build that all up again.
And it's almost, I think it's kind of discouraging in that, I got spurs hanging right behind my head. You can't see them, but sink your spurs in and try that first. That would be what I would think about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And some people, they're like a excitement, adrenaline junkie, and they and that's just not life. Life isn't always, the most exciting thing in the whole wide world, and you have to learn to live and live in the everyday and be a consistent Christian, pray and read your Bible and study and win souls and, do right just on a regular, Thursday or whatever, And so I think that's a part of it. It's maturity, I think, comes along with some of that. But some people, they just don't stay anywhere any length of time, not because God's moving them, but just because they feel like they need another adventure. Yeah. They need another something exciting. And I would say get close to Jesus. Man, if you stay in your Bible and stay close to Jesus, man, he'll blow your mind every day.
Yes, sir.
I mean, never lose the wonder of it all. But
that's right.
Anyway, I was just thinking that would not be a good reason to leave, and I think some people might do that. I would say maybe another one, when not to make a ministry change, is when you're very jealous of other people and their ministries. And if that's really in your heart, it's hard to admit. It's hard to look in the mirror and say, this is really what's going on. But I think if you pray and ask the Lord to show you some things, you might find out, I'm doing a little more comparison, especially in this social media day where everything is everywhere, and you could see what's going on in everybody's church all the time. Ugly. Yeah, and most people post more good than bad and ugly. And so you look over there and think, well, this isn't happening here, but it's happening over there. And you think, well, it'll never happen here, so I got to leave here if I'm going to get that. I would just say, don't let jealousy be the driving force in it. If you're driven by ambition or pride, like you're trying to climb the ladder, never look at any ministry position as this will get me to the next spot.
My goodness.
This will get me to the next step. And I think that's, again, you got to really search hard. It's hard to be honest. It's hard really to be honest and say, you know what? This might be pride. This might be self-glory and vainglory and ambition. And I feel like, if I took that church or if I had that ministry, more people would see me and I'd be more visible and things. There's nothing wrong, I think, with wanting expanding influence for the glory of God. But there's a fine line between that and like trying to climb a ministry ladder, if you will, and using people to accomplish, accomplish self-ambition.
It's very empty.
Yeah.
It's very empty. And I'll say this.
Yeah.
Not that God is mad when a man gets a big work or a big ministry, because I think God chooses who he uses,
sure,
right?
Absolutely.
But that's not God's design for everybody. Mm-hmm. God's design for some men, God's success for some men is pastoring 50 people on the backside of a mountain, because those people need a shepherd.
That's right. They need a pastor.
And Brother Bagwell, years ago, which is funny, I think we talked about Brother Bagwell in one of our last episodes together. Yeah. Brother Bagwell, years ago, I remember him, it was one of the last times I ever drove him, because he got married soon thereafter, and I wasn't even officially a youth pastor at this point, and he asked me, just randomly one night, dropping me off, he's like, Brother Chris, would you be willing to preach in just little country churches the rest of your life? And I'm like, at that time, I would have preached anywhere.
Yeah,
I'm like,
if
they're having a rooster fight, I'd go preach at the rooster fight. But I was like, yes, sir. And it hit me. Brother Bagwell is one of the premier evangelists in our day, and has been for our lifetime, right?
Absolutely.
And most of his preaching is in little country churches.
Absolutely.
Every night, feeding the flock of God.
Yeah.
And so if I could say anything to just bouncing off what you're saying, Brother Chris, if I could say anything to young men especially, because we've had some questions about this, young men especially, the way up with God is down. You know, humble yourselves before the mighty hand of God, and he will exalt you in due time. God resisteth the proud, giveth grace unto the humble. We have this idea, and unfortunately it's just been, I don't think anybody purposely did this, but if you get your face on the flyer, then you've arrived.
Right.
And the platform is not the pinnacle of the Christian walk.
No,
it's just not.
It's not, and it's this way in the business world. It's this way in the ministry world. There's been a lot of businessmen and ladies these days, and a lot of preachers in the ministry world have climbed the ladder of ministry success, and I put that in quotes, ministry success. What outsiders would deem as ministry success. They've climbed the ladder and got to the top, only to realize there's nothing there. There's nothing there. It's empty. It's vanity. You know, Solomon would say it's emptiness. And you know, I've experienced some measure of that. Not that I've arrived anywhere, but you know, I've got to preach in some places I always wanted to preach. And I thought, you know, as a young preacher, you think, man, if I could just preach there, if I could just do that, if I could just, man, that would be it. Well, I've got not everything, but I've got to do a lot of those things already. And you know what I found out? No, it's not there.
It's not.
No, it's not there. Real satisfaction is found in a relationship with Jesus.
Yes, sir.
And that's the same for the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, and it's the same for a pastor of a church. You'll only if you think you got to move ministries and have a bigger work to be satisfied, you're only going to move there and be even more disappointed because what you're going to find out that it's not there, and then you're going to wonder, am I ever going to get it? I heard a celebrity say this one time, and if I call his name, everybody know who it was. But he said something to this effect, and I used this when I preached through Ecclesiastes because I thought it went well with this idea. He said, the only thing worse than having none of your dreams come true is to have all of your dreams come true and find out that you're still miserable.
My goodness.
And I'll tell you can do that in ministry, and you can, you know, you can have you could check off every box you ever wanted to do, but then when you look inside and you realize you're still empty, that is a devastation that's worse than not having your dreams come true, because then you think, well, I'll never find it. Yeah. And so ministry satisfaction is found in Jesus. It's found in walking with God every day. It's not found in how many people you pastor, reaching another membership goal or whatever plateau or whatever mile marker you're trying to reach, or preaching this meeting or that meeting or whatever. It's not found there. And if you look for those places and you reach those things and you find out there's nothing there the hard way, you're going to be very, very, very disillusioned, disappointed. And that's when we're not talking about ministry transition. That's when we're talking about ministry resignation altogether.
Altogether.
You're not transitioned to it. You're just out, you know, because and that's the reason I think a lot of preachers are out of the ministry altogether, is because they did reach some of those pinnacles and success and found out, I haven't found what I'm looking for there. And now they're just out altogether. They're very, very disappointed and very disillusioned with ministry. So it's got to be that way. Don't matter if you're pastoring 50 people or 20 people on the backside of nowhere, or you're pastoring 1,000 people in the middle of a metropolitan city or whatever. You know, it's the same for both people. It doesn't matter where you are. Your satisfaction comes from Jesus and knowing Jesus.
And we're not saying not to strive for more.
That's right.
We're just saying that you may reach a place and a number may never be enough.
Yeah,
you know, God just brought this. I read an article. Michael Jordan was interviewed on I think it's 50, when he turned 50. I think that's when this article was from. I could look it up, but I remember the quote, so I'm not worried about when it was. But he's told the interviewer. And here's the thing: Michael Jordan did things in basketball that nobody's ever done. You know, he's the GOAT, by the way. LeBron James is not the GOAT, but that's not what we're here for. You know, leave all your hate mail, all right? But I'm just telling you. But nobody's done what he's done, right? Everybody's mimicked him, trying to do what he did, but nobody's done what he's done in the amount of time he did it. But my point is he said this, and so what I'm getting at is he got the pinnacle, right? As far as what we would consider, he was the greatest,
the top. Yeah.
He said this in that state, and of course he was 10 years out of basketball.
Yeah.
This is what he said. He said, "I've never found peace outside of the game of basketball." And in all reality, if you go back and listen to him talking when he was playing basketball, he was always trying to beat other people. He's always trying to beat himself. He wasn't finding peace in basketball.
Right. Yeah.
Think about it. The man who got all of it,
Yeah.
he said, I still don't have peace.
Yeah.
So for the lost man, he needs Jesus. For the businessman, he needs Jesus. And for the preacher man, he needs Jesus.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, that's it. It's a temptation that's common to man. It don't matter what your field is or whatever. So, I would say, I guess we could sum it up like this about don't make a ministry change out of dissatisfaction.
Yeah.
Because you're just going to find you'll go somewhere else and be dissatisfied all over again because you're not dealing with the same problem. And that's one thing that I feel like, the Lord showed me going from one ministry to another. I really thought I was going to leave some problems, somewhere. But you find out, problems, it's just people are, have problems. You have problems. And my biggest problem I took with me.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about my wife.
Don't talk about Heather.
No, I'm not talking about my wife. I'm talking about me. I took me with me and the guy in the mirror. And so that's your biggest problem. So I would say don't make a ministry change when you're discouraged, when you're bored, when you're jealous, when you're dissatisfied or trying to, climb the ladder, thinking that you'll find what you're looking for. And then this is a kind of heavy one, but I think this is right. You're in no shape to discern the will of God if you're living in sin. If you're living in habitual sin, if you got strongholds and addictions and things that are getting a hold of you, you can't discern the will of God for your life. In fact, now you might need to make a ministry change as far as like maybe stepping down and getting some help for whatever's going on. But, I know that might be a little heavy, but I thought
I'm glad we need to talk about it.
That's not you don't know if you're not living. I'm not saying living in perfection, but I'm talking about if you're not living, it's just like pornography. Yeah. That's one of the main things that I think about. But alcohol, drugs, prescription drugs, things like that. If any kind of habitual sin,
sexual things,
strongholds that are in your life. And again, I'm not talking about you got to reach a place of perfection before you can discern God's will, but you might make a huge mistake for your family. You need to get some help. Get some victory. Step down from the ministry, even if a little bit.
Reach out to somebody.
But you're gonna make a misstep because you don't. It's hard to know God's will and discern God's will, if not impossible, when you're living maybe a duplicitous life, a double life. So I just thought that might be something to add on there. But,
man, that's good. Yeah. I want to talk about this, Brother Chris, and I'm not like going, and you can go in as far as you want to with your side of this, but I remember sitting in the Suburban that day, and there was some fears about changing, what you'd always done, right? And you can go into as much of that as you want to. And then my biggest fear, when I left the youth pastorate, we were seeing God do something in our county around here because you were pastoring here at the time.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
I was getting to be the youth pastor in the area at the time, and God was doing something amazing. And I didn't want to walk away from that, fearing that I would never see it again. Mm-hmm. Right? I was like, what if this never happens again? And then obviously, when I come to Ridge Road, I was afraid that, what's going to happen to who will go, right? What's going to happen to all this other ministry that God's built up? Because in my mind, who will go was my life's work, right? Before I came to the church, I'm like, this is what God's got me here for. I've even told you that very statement. And I dealt with fear. How did you process that, if you don't mind talking about that, and maybe even share some of the fears if you want to that we talked about those days, but how did you process that and just get past it to go into the next step?
Yeah, well, I don't know if I was able to process all the fears. I did it. I feel like I did it, and, with the fears, I don't think it was a step of faith so much as it was I was afraid not, I was afraid to, but then I got to be afraid not to, because when the Lord made it very, very clear. But I think, there's always going to be an element of a little bit of trepidation, maybe not call it fear, but, maybe in a biblical sense.
Yeah, I agree.
But, trepidation, hesitation, I didn't know. I just had to come to the place. Okay, my fears were this. My fears were, some were legitimate, some were illegitimate, some were carnal, some were natural, or I don't know if you call them spiritual, but some were just downright carnal, and I might be afraid to even share them with you. But I was afraid. I think, number one, I guess probably on a very basic level, I was afraid about taking care of my family, you know,
Yes.
providing for my family, doing all that. Not that I, can't get a job and provide, and I would. I
Yes,
would
sir.
absolutely do it in a heartbeat. I'll do whatever it takes to put food on the table and a roof over my head for my wife and children, and I definitely would do that. But my fear was, I know this is what God wants me to do, but I want to take care of my family. I think maybe even bigger than that, broader than that, there's a fear of missing God's will.
Mm-hmm.
Like, am I doing this because am I discouraged? Is this pride? Is this is this boredom? All the things that I mentioned are things that I kind of went through, and so I was afraid of missing God's will, and regretting it very greatly down the road. I was fear of regret, and looking back and say, what did I do? What did I get? Because I knew how good I had it. And I knew that I had people that loved me. There's preachers that would kill for what I had, in the pastorate, a good church family, and people that love you and pray for you and are behind
Yes.
you and all those things. Not that it couldn't all fall apart, in a week or two. But I felt like that's what I had there, and those people were like family to us. And so I was afraid I was going to look back and regret it. I was a fear of failure. I mean, you step out and tell everybody I'm going to evangelism, but then nobody books you to preach a meeting. I feel, looking silly. And I was afraid of what preachers would say. And I did. I had a lot of preachers say, "Hey, you're crazy." When I moved from Georgia to North Carolina,
Mm-hmm.
and when I moved from Walters Grove into evangelism, I had a lot of preachers say, "Man, you're crazy," and they didn't love, maybe tongue in cheek, but I think there was an element of truth, and they're like, "Man, that's just crazy." Why would you leave a place like that? How are you going to feed all those kids? And so I was fear of failure. I was afraid of failing. And even maybe more than that, I was afraid of looking like I was failing. And that's pride is what that is, It just comes down to pride. I was afraid of who I was. I knew Chris Simpson, the pastor, but I hardly knew who Chris Simpson was anything else.
I remember us talking about that.
And that was one thing. I'm like, okay, I study my Bible every week. I pray. I walk with God. Do I do that because I have to preach 3 times a week? Or do I do it because I love God?
Yeah.
And so I was afraid of, of kind of figuring out who I am, without having that title pastor attached to my name. And so there were some fears I had to get over. Finally, what I come down to, when I finally realized, okay, this is what God is doing in my life, I just had to say, okay, I don't know what kind of lifestyle. I know what kind of lifestyle we're accustomed to living right now. I don't know if it's going to be the same, but that's okay.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I may look like a silly fool to all the world, but as long as I know in my heart this is what God called me to do, I had to resign to the fact that, I don't care what people think. And I don't care what people say. Not that I want to ruin my testimony.
No.
But I don't want the fear of man to be a snare to doing the will of God. And I had to just kind of, deal with every one of those things. Like, am I willing to go get a job? Am I willing to swing a hammer or do whatever I need to do to, I never had to do that before, in the ministry. God blessed me at age 18 to go into full-time ministry. And I've been in full-time ministry ever since. Ever since I got married, I've been in full-time ministry. And so am I willing to do those things? I have great respect for bivocational pastors and all that, but it's just never something I did. And I thought, you know what? I am willing to. I am. If I'm doing what God told me to do, then I am willing to. So I kind of had to work through all those things and say, these things might happen, but even if they do, I know I'm doing the will of God.
Yes, sir. And, God honors faith.
Yeah.
So I have watched God, literally blow the doors open for you.
Yeah,
to God be the glory.
Yeah,
and I'm not trying to build you up. You're my best friend. We make fun of each other more than we compliment each other. But I've watched God absolutely just blow it open for you in a good way. Yeah. Preaching in new crowds that we've never preached in, preaching in large places, little places, every places. It sounds like a Dr. Seuss book. Yeah. But in all seriousness, though, I believe God honors that step of faith.
Sure.
My fear was who will go will shut down, and how in the world am I going to?
Right.
And then God sent more people to help. God has built it up, and I give him the glory, but I really do believe God just honors faith.
Yeah,
and
that's it.
He can see what we don't.
Yeah.
man, I'm thinking about this quote, and I don't remember who said it. Maybe you can remember what preacher said it back in the day, but I've heard it said, if God doesn't open the door, don't try climbing through the window.
Yeah, sure.
And I think a lot of people, I think you noted at the very beginning, it's discouragement.
Yeah.
And they are trying to force something to happen because they're dissatisfied or discouraged where they're at. And that's going to come for everybody. It's just natural. It's kind of like, husband and wives should not, and they obviously shouldn't, but they very rarely do husband and wives just put their arguments out on line. She only posts when he brings her flowers, right? And everything's looking good. Right. But you don't understand they've been fighting for 2 weeks. Yeah. Don't gauge off of what you see. Just get with God. And that kind of segues into this. For me personally, I'll talk about it after. I want to give you the opportunity to talk about it first. But could you kind of walk through, what it was like when you knew about White Oak, when you knew about Walters Grove?
Yeah.
You walked through that.
Yeah, so I kind of, talk about when not to.
Yeah.
I guess maybe like, how do you know?
Yeah,
and that's the $1 million question. And I've had,
it's going to look different for everybody.
It is. There's no like cross the board. It's one of those things like, how do you know if you're called to preach? And every preacher has been asked that, and you hate. But this is the answer they probably gave you. This is the answer people gave me. Yeah. And this is the answer you give to, young preachers, young men that are thinking about the call to preach. You almost just say like, well, you just know. And that's a horrible answer, but at the same time, I haven't been able to come up with a better one, Yeah. It's just you just know, you just can't get away from it. So I think there's an element of that when God's moving. And I would say on the flip side, since we're kind of flipping things over a little bit, when not to and why some people do and shouldn't. Some people transition or leave a ministry and they probably should stay. I would say that there's probably some that stay when they should go. And we put such and we should on. We look at a man that's been at a church. He's been there 40 years. He's been there 35 years. He's been there 45 years. And we look at that man and we hold him in high regard, and we should. Okay, yes. I'm not saying not to. That is great to be able to stay in one place 40 years, 45 years. But you have to know that's good, but at the same time, that's not God's will for every preacher. And just because I'm not saying like jump around here and there and everywhere like every 18 months moving somewhere. That's probably not God's will either, I would say. And in fact, I can probably emphatically say it's not God's will. I mean, just move all around. But at the same time, my mind when I went to White Oak Spring, took my first church, I thought, I'm going to be here the rest of my life. And then when I went to Walters Grove, I thought, I'm going to be here the rest of my life. And so I really felt that way, and I think you need to go into it with that. I think it's Adrian Rogers that said, be ready to stay 40 years, but be ready to leave tomorrow, if God tells you to. And so you gotta do what God says. And if you stay somewhere 40 years, but God told you to leave after 25, well, it doesn't matter how many preachers and people applaud you. At the judgment seat of Christ, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. A lot of trouble. You're going to lose a lot of rewards because you're supposed to leave. God called you to a mission field, or God called you to evangelism, or God called you to take a smaller church somewhere else, or something like that, or God had a different plan for that. And a lot of times what we do is, God blesses a place, but then God, sovereignly decides to do something different. And a lot of people can't handle it. They can't transition, and they stay there, and they kill it. And God takes it, and it becomes just a monument of what used to be when God, is transitioned. So the pride of man can cause a man to leave a ministry he's supposed to stay at, but can also cause him to stay at a ministry he's supposed to leave. Man, God does change people's fields. And I know preachers will talk about you and say, well, and I've had little snarky comments made about me. Well, he couldn't cut it as a pastor. He couldn't handle this or handle that or whatever. That's fine. They can say whatever they want. And I was introduced like that at a pulpit. Like, well, he couldn't make it in the pastorate, so he's in evangelism now. Brother Simpson, come preach to us. That was my introduction.
What a great introduction.
Great introduction. And everybody just kind of laugh it off, but at the same time, you wonder, is that what people think about me? Is that what they really think? But okay. And then again, you just gotta, humility says it doesn't matter. God knows, and that's got to be enough. It's got to be enough that God knows, and God knows. So I would say that God does move people. It does happen. It happens all the time, and it may happen more than we think. And people are afraid. I know pastors that have good pastorates that's left and gone on the mission field. It's almost like, wow, what in the world? He's so crazy. I can't believe that. But I wonder if God hadn't called about 100 more than what's done it. But, a salary, a parsonage, a paycheck. Stability, consistency, knowing, kind of how life is going to be. And, you think about your children and all that kind of stuff has kept men from following the will of God for their life. And then, they just kind of roll on. But God's called them to do something else. And so, anyway, it does happen. And so I think we need grace. I think as preachers, we need to have grace with each other.
Yes.
When God moves men around, not automatically think the worst and assume the worst about people. And I guess maybe I'm just speaking from my own experience, and maybe I didn't feel like that before there were some transitions in my life, but I do feel that way. But I would say this, here's how God worked in my life, and I think this is how God works. I think, first of all, God will put it in your mind. I think He will, you'll think about it. Because if you never think about it, that's how God works. He works through, especially with the will of God, Romans 12:1, we can't be conformed to this world, 12:1 and 2, but transformed by the renewing of your mind. What does that do? That ye may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. The renewal of your mind and having a renewed mind is the key to testing and discerning the will of God. That's Romans 12:2. That's exactly what that verse means. And so God will, as you walk with the Lord, He'll put it in your mind. You'll begin to think about it. And then I think God begins to deal with your desires of your heart. He will change your desires. God, not that I didn't want to be a pastor, didn't want to be there, but in a real sense, God began to change my desires. I wanted to travel more. I wanted to preach revivals. I wanted to do those things. And I believe God works. If you delight yourself in the Lord, He'll give you the desires of your heart. And that doesn't mean that He'll give you everything that you want. That means He will literally implant desires in your heart. And so I think, and I have, not everybody agrees with this philosophy of the will of God, but my philosophy of the will of God is walk with God, have all your sins confessed, live clean, live holy, live right, and love God with all your heart, be willing to do whatever for Him, put your body down on the altar of sacrifice to God, and then do what you want to do. I believe God changes your desires. I don't think there's ever been... God didn't take me kicking and screaming into evangelism. Now, was there an element of... Yes. I mean, I didn't want to leave, and there was a sadness, there was all that. But at the same time, there was a desire in my heart. When I went from Georgia to North Carolina, I wanted to. And that's hard to explain, but... It is God put desires in your heart, and I believe God works that way. Yeah. But as long as you're walking with the Lord, and then it's going to be confirmed, and God's going to do it. He's going to reaffirm it through the Word of God and through people. Like, okay, so I talked to you first, then I talked to some other men of God that were in my life, and I had them reaffirmed, like some great men of God that said, Chris, I can see you being an evangelist. I can see that working out. I can see that. I can see God using you in that way. Some men of God that have walked with me through things and been with me through some things. And then circumstances. God began to, just open up doors, and God uses circumstances of life. And so, I believe God will do that. He'll put it in your mind, and then He will begin to implant desires in your heart. It'll be confirmed and reaffirmed when you read the Bible. Every time I open the Bible, it just said evangelism, and that's what God was doing in my heart. And circumstances, mentors, friends. One way you know that you're doing something that's not God's will is you don't want to tell anybody about it, and you get mad when people challenge it. If you get mad and very defensive when people challenge you on it and question you on it, that's a good sign that you're not doing what God told you to do. I was willing to take any... I was trying to find people to talk me out of it. Yeah. And then I had some good advice that was this, like, okay, if you sincerely believe this is what God wants you to do, start moving that direction and pray this prayer. Lord, if I'm doing what's wrong, stop me. Yes. Stop me. I feel like in my heart I'm doing what's right. Now, Lord, if I'm not, please stop me. So good. Please stop me. And so I began to pray that prayer, and God didn't stop me. Yeah. He was pushing me forward, and so I really feel like God does that. And I would say that only make a ministry change when you're serving faithfully with a sincere heart, and not being lazy, but fervent in the Lord, serving where God has you presently, and then God divinely interrupts you.
Yeah.
If you're looking to leave, if you're trying to get out of a situation, you're probably going to jump into another situation you're not going to like. But if you're serving fervently and faithfully and sincerely and in a holy manner in where you are at, and God has interrupted you, and He is relentlessly put something in your heart that you cannot get away from, even though in some ways you've tried to, then that is God working in your life.
And that goes back to that general will of God will lead to the specific will of God.
Yes, absolutely.
That's exactly. And you were talking about preachers having grace with other preachers. I think too, we need to have grace with missionaries, and this is something I would love to see change. Now, listen, we got to have parameters. If a guy leaves a church, leaves a mission board, and changes a field, I understand there needs to be some questions.
Sure.
But most churches would drop the Apostle Paul.
Yeah, sure.
Because he was in a different place all the time. Mm-hmm. We sent you to go to Philippi, and you're in Thessalonica. Well, he's doing the work of God. Yeah. And I understand there's a balance and all that, but sure. I think we definitely need to have more grace with missionaries in that aspect if they're going to continue to serve God. And you hit that. But right. And then Brother David Ballinger, he said, he's in the West Indies, in the Caribbean, and he said he had preachers telling him, well, if you back when he was praying about it, well, if you enjoy what you're doing, that's probably not the will of God.
Yeah, that's a horrible philosophy. If you like what you're doing, like God only is going to make you miserable. Like you're only in the will of God if you're miserable. It's like you're only spiritual if you're broke. Or
it makes
whatever.
You wonder, like, what do they think about their church and their wife?
Yeah,
if that's their mentality.
That's a horrible philosophy. I think you'll enjoy it. Wherever God calls you to, He'll put a joy and satisfaction in your heart,
Yeah. So the night God called me to preach, me and you were together, and we were 12. Okay, which is just crazy. All these landmark. Brother Chris has always done everything first before me, but that same draw or that same realization was so close to like what I had experienced a year earlier about salvation. Right. Mm-hmm. I was talking to somebody yesterday about, and I was thinking about our conversation, but I was talking about somebody about when I was 18 and I felt like God wanted me to go to Bible college, but I wanted to go to agriculture college, and I sat there, and me and you've talked about this before, and I was debating that same, maybe not as strong, but that same drawing of God. That's the way I express it. That same drawing or realization of God wanting me to do something. I can line it up where it may not always be as strong as that draw to salvation or that call to service, but it kind of matches up. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And the same when God wanted me to go to Brother Gravely's, leave here, go to Brother Gravely's, go into full-time evangelism. Like God dealt with me about evangelism. Then God dealt with me about Brother Gravely's. And then so all this is already in my heart. And you know this, like a few weeks later, I'm just talking to Brother Gravely, no like hints or nothing, and he just asked, hey, would you ever consider coming and working out of my church? And I'm like, what in the world? Yeah. But I'd already had that, I don't even know what to call it, Brother Chris, nudge, call, draw, I don't know, but I'd already felt that direction. And I hate to even use the word feel, but because we don't base everything off of feeling. Well, how would you say that?
I don't know. I think God does, He guides us.
Yes.
I mean, here's the thing. If you're saved, you got the Holy Ghost living on the inside of you. That is a living person. Yes, I mean, sir. On the inside of you. I don't know how else to describe it other than you feel a leading and guiding. And then at the same time, you don't lean on, just feelings alone.
No. We go to the Word of God.
Right, we go to the Word.
But we precede that with the general will of God.
We do. It's hard to, it's hard to describe. It's one of the things like, how do you know you're called to preach? I don't know, but you just know it. And it's the same way when God is moving you, transitioning you, calling you to another place or whatever. It's just something I feel like our default position ought to be, well, I'm going to stay, but when there's that relentless, drawing, pursuing, wooing, whatever you want to call it, I think you can't ignore that when it won't go away.
Yeah. And then the same, like, in December of 22, which is so crazy. When me and you were talking in November of that year, like, I had no hint, no leanings, I'm like, have at it, man.
Yeah,
sure.
Sure.
I told you, come on in, the water's fine, basically. Yeah. And then, like, 2 weeks later, I'm just laying in bed one night praying, and it's like, we were off for the winter, basically. I was just doing Sundays, and we were here in Hiram at my parents' and in the camper, and I'm just like, oh, my word. It was just overwhelming. Yeah. And then 2 weeks after that, Miss Chloe comes to me, and of course, me and you had spoken by then, but I had not told Miss Chloe, and she's like, hey, have you ever thought about taking Ridge Road? Yeah. And I'm like, what in the world is going on here? God had been dealing with her heart. And I'm not saying that always has to happen like that, but it was just more confirmation for me. Yeah. And again, we're not basing this off of a feeling. You do the general will of God, fervent, hot, white, just get after it for the will of God in your life right in front of you. You will run smack dab into the specific will of God for your life. But there is a discernment. That's a good biblical word.
It is.
There is a discernment from God when these life things are happening. And listen to your people around you. Now, not everybody's going to give you good advice. I'm talking about your spiritual mentors. Listen to them. Your close friends. Listen to them, because they can. People on the outside. This is for relationships. This is for ministry changes. Whatever. People on the outside are not emotionally as involved as you are, right? When November 22, there was a lot of emotion tied to what you were facing. Same with me in December 22. Yep. You had a better view sometimes of what I was going after without the emotional, involvement. Right. And that's important, because they can see red flags that you don't see. Yeah. And listen to people. If somebody's saying, hey, dummy, this don't look good. Yep. Listen, there might be some very good advice in that. I was just thinking about that. And I remember that whole year of 23, you talking about God changing your desires. Mm-hmm. I loved evangelism. I still love evangelism. Yeah, last weekend, getting to go do the Who Will Go meeting and going and doing tent meetings, going overseas and preaching the gospel. I love it. Right now, I just get to take a small army with me, and which is super cool because of the local church. But that 23, God saved Trent and Savannah, and we started discipling them and some others here in town, and then I just didn't want it. Like, I would get out of this super good meeting where like 5 people got saved, and we're on the phone like, hey, how'd it go back home? Yeah. Like, we just wanted to know what was going on here. Yeah. And God put my heart here. God put my desire here. And that, it was even more confirmation. Like, I couldn't, I didn't, and I want to speak to this and see what your take is on it. I can't specifically remember this in your life, but it seems like every time I got ready, God began to deal with me about a ministry change in life. There was like 4 other avenues that opened up. Has that happened to you?
Well, I don't think it is. Not for me.
Not for you.
Not for me. When I left Georgia to go to North Carolina,
it was very quick.
Yeah, there wasn't. Well, there was a couple other opportunities. Yes. I guess so. So maybe in that aspect there was, but the Lord had confirmed it in my heart in some ways that I knew I was supposed to be at Walters Grove in North Carolina, and but the last one, no, I didn't. When I resigned Walters Grove, I didn't have
another option. Yeah,
I didn't have other churches, asking me to pastor or anything else. It was just evangelism. So I didn't. So
I just felt like every time, Brother Wayne Henderson, before I went to evangelism, I don't know if you remember this, but he was wanting me to come take that church that he was at. Yeah. And so that was like out of the blue, and here I am, God's dealing with me about evangelism. And then when I left evangelism, and you remember this, there was a church in South Carolina want me to move Who Will Go underneath their church and provide a camp and all kinds of stuff. And then there was 2 churches considering me to pastor, and I'm like, no. Like, it was alluring because I'm like, man, this would be great, especially the Who Will Go part. Yeah. But it was, I don't know. I knew, But I think sometimes, not the devil, but there will be other doors open up to kind of lure you away, possibly from where you're supposed to be.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
You got any more?
Well, I was thinking about you said something about maybe some practical stuff on how to make a ministry.
Oh yeah,
change.
that's great.
You want? Is that
Go
okay?
for it.
Maybe
Go
a
for
couple
it.
things. I just wrote down 3 words. I think they're adverbs here that I was thinking about. I dictated some of the stuff riding down the road on the way here, so I was just pondering about these things. I would say that if you're going to make a ministry change, and it might look different, depending on from what kind of field to what kind of field, pastorate to pastorate to evangelism to pastorate. Obviously it's going to be different. Missions, different, changing fields, changing types of fields, all different things. But I would say that a good rule of thumb, and again, there possibly could be some exceptions to these, but a good rule of thumb is when you make a ministry change, do it patiently or slowly. I think if you feel rushed, a lot of times that's not God. I don't know if God rushes us. I think the devil is like a used car salesman. You got to do it right now. You got to, if you don't right now, you're going to miss this opportunity. Yeah. I don't know if God's always moves like that. And again, there might be some exceptions, but when I'm thinking of it, I'll just tell you how it was fleshed out in my life practically was, I knew that God, we talked in November of 2022. Okay, well, I didn't resign until October of 23.
Yes, sir.
So you're talking about a whole year.
Yes, sir.
So in that year, I was working through, okay, am I discouraged? Is it pride? Is it, am I bored? All those things that we talked about a little bit ago. I'm working through all of these things. And then even when I resigned the church, and again, not everybody's situation can be like this, but mine was to the point where I told the church what God was doing in my heart in October of 2023, but I stayed through December.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of a patient. I didn't want anybody to think that I'm just leaving in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
I'm packing up my bags and just getting out of town like something's wrong.
Well, you've invested in those people.
Yeah, and I loved them, and they loved me, and I had the privilege to do that. I understand not everybody's got to do that, but I think if you got a hasty spirit, I think it's dangerous.
Yes.
I think if you feel like if I don't do it right now, I'm going to miss the opportunity. I think sometimes that can be a good sign that you're not doing what's right. I think God is a patient God. He's a long-suffering God, and I think you need to take time to wrestle with some things. And God will draw a line and say, okay, well now it's time. But I would say patiently and slowly is always, in my opinion, it's the best way to do it. So patiently, and then I would say secondly, do it ethically. If you're going to leave somewhere ethically. Make sure everything is right. Even if they don't do you right, you do them right. Don't leave a church on bad terms. Don't leave a ministry or a missions board or whatever, mission board. Don't do that on bad terms. You fulfill whatever you need to fulfill. Sir. Make sure the transition is ethical and on every front, because all you have is your integrity. All you have is your testimony, and just make sure everything is on the up and up.
Yes,
and that's probably, you could say a lot of things about that. But then I would say, lastly, if you're going to leave, do it slowly, do it ethically, and do it graciously.
Yeah.
And this is not always easy, because sometimes you're going to have people that are upset with you because you're making a change. And that's tough. That was one of the hardest things for me. People that I love with all my heart, and like literally, an hour ago, they would take a bullet for me, and then now that I told them the Lord's moving me, now they want to put a bullet in me.
Pull the trigger.
Yeah, they're very. I had people that were very, very upset with me, and people this day that are still a little upset with me about things. And again, I didn't do anything unethical or nothing like that, but just simply saying, hey, I'm not going to be here much longer. I stayed for a couple months, but the Lord's calling me into something else. Immediately, okay, you're dead to me. You're dead. And that's tough. That's tough. But you know what? Be gracious with them, even if they're not gracious with you. Be gracious with them, and I'll tell you why. Because not everybody understands that. You got people that they live in the same place for 60 years. They get up, they work their job. I mean, everything. There's consistency in their life, and a lot of times they're operating out of hurt. They're hurt at you. There'll be people, if you leave one mission board, go to another one, there's people that are hurt. They're sad, and they're just hurt, and they lash out in ways, and you'll regret responding in kind to that. And I would say just be as gracious as you can, understanding that not everybody understands the call that God's put on your life. God didn't go around to everybody and tell them what he's doing with your life. He told you. And you just got to be gracious and let time will bear it out. Time will take care of things. But I think if you leave ungraciously and try to, set people straight and set people right, I think you might regret that down the road. And so I would say do it as graciously. Make it a gracious transition as possible. Yeah.
Man, that's good. That's good stuff. Well, you got anything else? I think that's really good stuff. And, me and Brother Chris have had the great blessing of having great men pour into us.
Yes.
And a lot of this is compilation.
Absolutely.
I mean, just... Absolutely. We're not saying I don't want anybody to ever think we're two young preachers on here just trying to tell everybody what to do. We have been poured in greatly into, and we just want to pour out what's been poured into us. And these are all principles that's been poured into us. As a matter of fact, when you said that earlier about, dear God, I'm doing what I believe you want me to do, and if not, stop me. That's the same advice Brother Gravely gave me about when to know what to preach. If you don't just have that message burning on your heart. Does that make sense? Go to the pulpit saying, God, unless you change my heart, I'm not trying to live in rebellion. He always said that, I'm not living in rebellion unless you change my heart. This is what I'm going to go with. So, but that's just God pouring into us, and we people pouring into us. We want to pour into you. And if you got any more questions, feel free to comment. If you got any more suggestions for future episodes, leave those in the comments. And again, like, subscribe, and share. And we appreciate Brother Chris being with us today, and appreciate you listening today. God bless you. Have a good day.